Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. The day he left, I could feel something shift deep inside me. It wasn't a sudden change, but a slow realization that I'd been living in a lie. It wasn't like I didn't see the signs, but I refused to acknowledge them. There were whispers in the air. Late nights, unexplained absences, distant looks, but I brushed them off. I had convinced myself we were happy, that nothing could tear us apart. But when the door slammed behind him, I knew it was over. He didn't even look back. I couldn't breathe. My heart was suffocating, gripped by the weight of what was happening. He was leaving, and he was taking with him everything that mattered. I reached for him, but he was already gone. My world collapsed. I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, but I didn't. What could I say? The love we shared had turned into something unrecognizable, something cold, and all I was left with was emptiness. He didn't even say goodbye to our child, and that hurt more than anything. Our baby, the one we both dreamed of, was just as forgotten as I was. My mind couldn't process the truth. How could he do this to us? I remember standing in the doorway, watching him drive away. His car disappeared down the street, and all I could do was stand there, numb. Was this real? Was I dreaming? But no, it was all too real. His absence echoed in every corner of the house. The silence was deafening. I wanted to shout at him, to tell him how much he was destroying me, but there was no point. He had made his choice. He'd left me, and now I had to figure out how to survive. Alone. The world outside seemed to go on, but inside, I was frozen. All my hopes, all my dreams of our future, had been crushed. I had no idea how to move forward. The road ahead felt impossibly long and filled with nothing but darkness. It wasn't until later that I found out the truth, the real reason he left. It wasn't just that he was tired of me, or that we had grown apart. No, it was far worse than that. There was someone else. A man. I still couldn't believe it. My hands trembled as I read the messages. They were so casual, so cold. The words on the screen were a slap in the face, a final confirmation that the life I thought I knew was all a lie. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. He had fallen in love with someone else, and it wasn't even a woman. All the years we spent together, all the vows, the promises, meant nothing to him. I felt sick, betrayed, and utterly worthless. What had I done wrong? I kept asking myself, but the answers never came. All I had left were the shards of a broken heart. The world around me had shifted, and I was left standing in the ruins. I couldn't escape the constant loop of questions in my mind. Why? And what happened? Haunted me every waking moment. Had I missed the signs? Had I been so blind to the truth? The more I thought about it, the more it felt like I had been living in a fantasy. A dream world where I believed in his love, his loyalty. But that was all it was, a dream. And now I was wide awake, staring at the wreckage of everything I had believed in. The house felt empty, like a shell. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I couldn't escape the suffocating feeling of betrayal. I tried to distract myself, but nothing worked. Every corner of the house reminded me of him. Every room echoed with memories of our time together. But now, those memories were tainted, twisted by the truth of his departure. And there was no going back. My life, my world, had been completely turned upside down, and I didn't know how to right it. The days after he left were the hardest. I tried to keep it together, to act like everything was fine, but inside I was falling apart. I remember sitting in the living room, staring at the empty space where he used to sit. It was like something was missing, something irreplaceable. My heart ached, and I could feel the weight of his absence pressing down on me. I spent hours just sitting there, doing nothing. I didn't know how to process the loss, the betrayal. My mind kept circling back to our baby. How could he just walk away from us like that? How could he abandon his own child? The pain was unbearable. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I couldn't. I was too exhausted from the shock, from the constant ache in my chest. The truth was, I didn't know how to keep going. Everything felt pointless. I had been left alone to pick up the pieces, but I had no idea where to start. I remember the night I found the pictures. The old photos from our vacation, the ones we had taken years ago, when everything seemed perfect. They were hidden in a drawer, tucked away like they were nothing but old memories. But when I saw them, I couldn't breathe. It was like a punch to the gut. The man he had left me for had been there all along, in the background of those pictures, hidden in plain sight. He had been a part of our life, our world, even before I knew. I stared at the photo of the three of us together, thinking about how happy we looked. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have seen it? The realization hit me harder than anything. He had never really been mine. I had been just a chapter in his story, and now that chapter was over. I wasn't even part of the book anymore. I was just a footnote, a brief memory that would fade over time. The pain of losing him was bad enough, but the loss of our child felt like a cruel twist of fate. How could the universe take both of them from me? It wasn't supposed to be like this. My baby was supposed to grow up, to laugh, to live a full life. But instead, I was left with nothing but the hollow ache of what could have been. The hospital room was a blur. I could hardly remember the details, just flashes of nurses, doctors, the sterile smell of antiseptic. But the one thing I could never forget was the silence. The silence that followed our loss, the silence that echoed in my soul. I didn't know how to live with that kind of emptiness. The world outside seemed to go on, but inside, I was broken. I wanted to hold my child again, to feel their little hands in mine, but that was impossible. The grief was too much to bear. I was a mother without a child, a wife without a husband, and I didn't know how to move forward from there. I couldn't understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. One moment, I had a family. The next, I had nothing. I kept waiting for the nightmare to end, but it never did. Each day felt like a cruel reminder that my life had been taken from me. I used to believe that time healed all wounds, but the pain was persistent, unyielding. Every step forward felt like I was walking through quicksand, sinking deeper into a pit of despair. I couldn't even bring myself to leave the house. How could I face the world? How could I look at people when my life had been shattered into pieces? I kept thinking of my baby, the little one I would never see grow up, never hear laugh. That emptiness was all-consuming. The grief was like a dark cloud, following me everywhere, and I couldn't find the strength to make it go away. It was as if I were drowning in my own sorrow, with no one to save me. In the weeks that followed, I tried to make sense of everything, but there was no sense to be made. I had been married to him for years, trusted him with everything I had. But in the end, it all amounted to nothing. He had walked away without a second thought, leaving me behind with the wreckage of our lives. I tried reaching out to friends, but their pitying looks only made it worse. They didn't understand. They couldn't. No one could. What was I supposed to do now? How could I move on from this? I had no answers, only questions. I tried to keep busy, to distract myself from the pain, but it was always there. It lingered in every corner of my mind, gnawing at me, reminding me of what I had lost. The man I thought I knew was gone, and in his place, there was only a stranger, someone I couldn't even recognize. And worse, I had lost the child I had hoped would bring us closer. I was left with nothing. I found myself falling deeper into a void, one I didn't know how to escape. Each day was a struggle. I tried to convince myself that it would get better, that time would heal the wounds, but it didn't. It only made things worse. The loneliness was unbearable. I missed him, even though he had betrayed me. I missed the life we once had, the plans we made, the dreams we shared. But they were all lies, weren't they? Every promise he made to me had been broken. Every moment of happiness I thought we shared had been a mirage. He had moved on, and I was stuck in the past, clinging to something that no longer existed. I couldn't even cry anymore. The tears had all dried up. My heart was empty, like a shell, and I was just going through the motions of life, pretending to be okay when I was far from it. I didn't know how to survive in this new reality. It felt impossible. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to ask him how he could do this to me, to our baby. But what would be the point? He wasn't here anymore, and I had no way of reaching him. It wasn't like I could just pick up the phone and call him, ask him why he had chosen to leave. What could he possibly say to make it okay? There was nothing he could say, and that was the hardest part, knowing that there were no answers, no closure. It wasn't just that he had left. It was that he had chosen someone else. Someone else had taken my place, had stolen everything I thought was mine. And I couldn't escape that thought. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him with that other person, and it tore me apart. I couldn't help but wonder if he had ever really loved me at all, or if I had just been a convenient placeholder until he found what he was truly looking for. And that question haunted me, gnawed at me, making it even harder to breathe. The emptiness became my constant companion. I woke up every morning, knowing that my life had been irreparably changed. I no longer knew who I was or what I was supposed to be doing. I used to have a purpose, a family to care for, a husband to love. But now, I was just a shell of the woman I once was. The days bled into one another. It was hard to tell where one ended and the next began. I spent most of my time in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to shut out the pain, but it was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the thought of him, of what he had done. And worse, I couldn't escape the guilt, the feeling that I had somehow failed. What had I missed? Where had I gone wrong? If I had been better, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't my fault. It was his. He had made the choice. And still, that knowledge didn't make the pain any easier to bear. I don't know when it happened, but eventually, I started to close off. The world felt too big, too overwhelming. I couldn't face people, couldn't pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. I stopped going out. I stopped responding to calls, to messages. What was the point? What was the point in pretending that I was okay when I was dying inside? I had no energy left to be the person I once was. I couldn't even look at the old pictures of us anymore. They were too painful, too full of false promises. The memories that once brought me comfort now felt like daggers. Every laugh, every moment of happiness we shared seemed like a lie. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I truly knew about him. He had been a stranger in my life all along, and I had been blind to it. And now, he was gone, leaving nothing behind but broken pieces of a life that no longer existed. I had no choice but to confront the truth. My life had changed, and there was no going back. I wasn't the woman I used to be. I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. I had built my whole life around him, around us, around our family, and now it was gone. The hardest part wasn't just losing him. It was the fact that he had chosen someone else. Someone who wasn't me. Someone who had somehow been more important than our entire life together. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream and curse his name, to make him feel the pain that I felt. But I didn't. All I felt was hollow, empty. It was as though he had taken a piece of me with him, a piece that I would never get back. And the worst part was, he didn't even care. He didn't even look back. He had moved on, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer existed. I wanted to rebuild, but I didn't know how. Days turned into weeks, and still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stuck in some kind of limbo. I wasn't moving forward, but I wasn't really living either. I tried to make small changes, to get back to some sense of normalcy, but nothing worked. It was like the weight of everything had buried me under its heaviness. I would go through the motions of the day, make breakfast, clean the house, but it all felt meaningless. I kept thinking of the future, wondering how I was going to survive this. I couldn't be the woman I once was, the wife, the mother, because that version of me didn't exist anymore. I had been replaced, and as much as I tried to move on, to let go of the past, it always seemed to find a way back. I would remember something, a shared moment, a joke, a touch, and it would hit me all over again. It wasn't just that he was gone. It was that he had chosen to be gone. I found myself obsessed with the idea of him with someone else. It wasn't healthy, but I couldn't stop myself. Every time I saw a couple, or heard a song we used to listen to together, I thought about what he was doing now. Was he happy? Was he still in love with me? I didn't have the answers, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. What if he had never truly loved me? What if everything had been a lie from the start? The thought that he might have been pretending the whole time made my skin crawl. I couldn't believe it, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed possible. He had been so convincing, so affectionate, so loving. How could I have missed the signs? It felt like I had been living in a dream world, and now I was awake, surrounded by the ruins of everything that had once been so real. But it wasn't real. None of it was. I couldn't escape the constant ache in my chest. It was a physical pain, sharp and unrelenting. It was like something had been ripped from me, and I couldn't fill the empty space. I spent most of my time lost in my thoughts, replaying everything that had happened. I couldn't let go. How could I? He had been my everything. And now, he was gone. He had walked away without a second thought, leaving me to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. I kept asking myself why. Why had he done this? What had I missed? What could I have done differently? But there were no answers. No explanations. Only the silence of his absence. It felt like I was being suffocated by grief, drowning in it with no way to get to the surface. I wanted to fight, to rage against it, but I didn't know how. I didn't know where to start. It was easier to just give in, to let the pain wash over me and hope it would eventually fade. But it didn't. It never did. The first time I saw him after he left, it felt like a punch to the gut. He had moved on, just like that. He looked different, almost like a stranger. The love in his eyes was gone, replaced by something colder. He was no longer the man I had married. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that he had moved on, or that he didn't even seem to care about the devastation he had caused. There was no apology, no remorse, just indifference. It made me sick. He had walked away from everything we had built, from our life, our family, and he didn't even care. He was just gone. I wanted to scream at him, to ask him why, to make him feel the pain I was feeling, but I couldn't. I just stood there, numb, trying to keep my composure. But inside, I was falling apart. How could he do this? How could he just leave me and move on so easily? It didn't make sense. I began to resent him, though part of me still missed him. I hated myself for still caring, for still longing for the man who had left me in pieces. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I tried to fill the void with other things, work, distractions, even new hobbies. But nothing worked. Nothing could replace the space he had occupied in my life. And every time I thought I had let go, something would remind me of him. A song, a place, a memory. It was like he was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The emotional whiplash was exhausting. I couldn't move on, couldn't forget, no matter how hard I tried. It felt like I was stuck in a never-ending cycle of grief, of longing, of wishing things could go back to the way they were. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. That life was gone, and I had to find a way to survive without it. I tried to rebuild, piece by piece, but it never felt like enough. How could I rebuild a life when everything I had built was gone? My heart was broken, and no amount of time or effort seemed to heal it. I was lost in the process of trying to figure out who I was without him, without our child. I wanted to find joy again, to smile, to feel alive. But it felt like I was pretending. The truth was, I didn't know how to be happy anymore. It wasn't that I didn't want to. I did. But every time I thought about moving on, I thought about him, about the life we once had. And it hurt. It hurt more than anything to think that I could never go back to that our love was gone, and nothing could bring it back. All I had left was the shadow of what we had been, and that was a constant reminder that my heart would never fully heal. I remember the first time I tried to step outside after everything had fallen apart. It felt like I was walking through a fog. The world seemed to move so fast, but I was stuck, paralyzed in my own sorrow. I could hear people laughing, talking, living their lives, but I couldn't join them. How could I? I had lost everything. My husband, my child, my sense of self. What did I have left to offer? I couldn't connect with anyone. I couldn't even connect with myself. It was as if I were a ghost, wandering through life, but never truly living. I would force myself to smile, to act like I was okay, but it was exhausting. Pretending, lying. The truth was, I was broken. The pain never stopped. Every step I took, every breath I took, was weighed down by the weight of everything I had lost. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could carry it. There were days when I didn't know how I was still standing. I would look in the mirror and hardly recognize the woman staring back at me. She was a shadow of the person I once was, a broken version of herself. I used to be strong, confident, full of hope. But now, I was just a survivor. I wasn't living. I was just existing. I had lost my purpose, my joy, my love. The emptiness was suffocating, and no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. I tried to fill the silence with noise, music, TV, books, but it was all just a distraction. The loneliness was always there, lurking beneath the surface. The only time I felt anything at all was when I allowed myself to remember. Remember the way we were, the life we had built. But every time I did, the pain came rushing back, sharp and raw, and I couldn't handle it. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness, it was the anger. Anger that he had abandoned me, anger that he had chosen someone else, and anger that I couldn't change it. I would get so angry at myself, too. Why had I let this happen? Why hadn't I seen the signs? What had I done wrong? I couldn't stop the questions from swirling in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I hated myself for feeling weak, for allowing him to take everything from me. But the anger wasn't enough to fill the emptiness. I would rage against the injustice of it all, but it never brought me peace. It never brought me closure. And in the end, the anger only hurt me more. It kept me stuck in the past, unable to move forward. I needed to let go, but I didn't know how. The weight of my grief, my anger, was too heavy to bear. I started to realize that I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. I couldn't let this pain control me forever. But the thought of moving forward felt impossible. I was so scared. Scared of being alone forever. Scared of never being able to trust again. Scared of what the future might hold. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I had to try. I began small. I started going out more, even if it was just for a walk around the block. At first, I could barely leave the house, but little by little, I began to push myself. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, to crawl back into the safety of my bed and shut the world out again. But I didn't. I kept moving. Slowly, painfully, I began to find pieces of myself again. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I had to fight. I had to find a way to live again, to feel something other than sorrow. It was the smallest things that began to help. A hot cup of coffee in the morning. A kind word from a stranger. The sun setting on a quiet evening. I started to notice the little moments, the things I had taken for granted before. It wasn't enough to heal the wounds, but it was a start. It reminded me that there was still beauty in the world, even if it seemed far away. I began to reconnect with my own strength, the strength I had buried beneath the weight of my grief. I had been through something unimaginable, but I was still here. I wasn't dead. I was still living, still breathing, still capable of finding joy again. I started to let go of the anger, the bitterness, the resentment. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I couldn't let those emotions control me any longer. I had to let go and let myself heal. The journey wasn't going to be quick, but it was a journey worth taking. There were still moments when the pain would overwhelm me, when I would collapse under the weight of everything I had lost. But those moments were becoming less frequent. I was learning to navigate my grief, to live alongside it without letting it consume me. I began to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding a way to live with the memories, with the love, with the pain. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about making peace with it. I started to think about the future, not with fear, but with curiosity. What was out there for me? What new experiences awaited me? For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things would never be the same. Maybe I would always carry the scars of my past, but I could still find a way forward. I could still choose to live. One day, I was sitting at the kitchen table, lost in thought, when I realized something. I was no longer consumed by the need for answers. I didn't need to know why he left, why he chose someone else, or why our baby was taken from me. I had spent so long searching for answers, for closure, for something that would make it all make sense. But the truth was, there was no answer that would ever make it okay. There was no explanation that would undo the pain. And I had to accept that. I had to let go of the need to understand it all. Instead, I focused on what I could control, myself. I could choose how I responded to the pain. I could choose to heal, to move forward, to find happiness again. It wasn't easy, and there would still be difficult days ahead. But I knew now that I didn't need to have all the answers. I just needed to keep going. It wasn't an overnight change, but slowly, I started feeling more like myself again. It wasn't the same woman I had been before. She was gone, and I knew that. But this new version of me was stronger, more resilient. I had faced the unimaginable and survived it. That in itself was a victory. I started doing things for myself, things I hadn't done in years. I picked up old hobbies, painting, writing, even taking long walks. I began to appreciate the quiet moments again, the things that once brought me peace. But there was still a part of me that felt empty, still haunted by the past. I tried to make peace with it, to accept that there would always be a scar, but it didn't always work. There were still nights when I cried myself to sleep, still days when the loneliness felt overwhelming. But I kept pushing forward. I kept telling myself that the future wasn't set in stone, that I still had time to build something new. Then one day, something unexpected happened. I met someone new. It wasn't anything serious at first, just a casual meeting, a conversation, but something shifted inside me. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe there was a future for me after all. The thought of being with someone else, of opening my heart again, terrified me. I hadn't even considered the possibility of loving someone again. But as the days passed, I couldn't ignore the connection I felt. It wasn't about replacing him, about forgetting my past. It was about realizing that I was worthy of love, that I could still feel something for someone else. It was a terrifying thought, but also liberating. Maybe I wasn't broken beyond repair. Maybe I could heal, not just from the pain of losing him, but from everything I had been through. I didn't know where it would go, but for the first time in ages, I felt a sense of possibility. It wasn't easy. Trust didn't come easily, and the scars from my past were still raw. I was cautious, slow, unsure. But little by little, I began to open up. I found myself laughing again, smiling at things that once brought me joy. It was awkward at first, like learning to walk again after being bedridden for years, but I kept going. I kept letting myself feel, even when it was hard. I kept reminding myself that I deserved this, deserved love, happiness, peace. The new person I was seeing wasn't him. He didn't fill the hole left in my heart, but he helped me realize that my heart wasn't empty forever. It was capable of healing, of growing, of finding joy once more. I knew that I still had a long way to go. The journey of healing would take time, but I could see a future now, one that didn't involve clinging to the past, one that was mine to create. The more time I spent with this new person, the more I realized something else. I wasn't just healing because of him. I was healing because of me. I was learning to find peace with my past, to accept it as part of who I was, but not the only part of me. My worth wasn't tied to my past, to what had happened with my ex, to the loss I had experienced. I had value on my own. I had always had it, but I had forgotten. I was beginning to understand that I could still love and care for myself, even after everything that had happened. I was learning to be gentle with myself, to forgive myself for the mistakes I had made and the things I couldn't change. I had always been so hard on myself, believing that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't worthy of happiness. But now, I was starting to see that I was. I deserved joy, I deserved love, and I deserved peace. But of course, not everything was easy. There were still moments when I was consumed by the grief of losing my child. There were days when the memories of my husband's betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't something I could simply forget. It would always be part of me. I had to learn to carry it, to live with the sadness, the longing, and the love I still had for him, even though he was gone. But the pain no longer controlled me. I didn't allow it to define me. And slowly, I realized that it didn't have to. I could have sadness and still have happiness. I could mourn and still find reasons to smile. I didn't need to be defined by my past. It was a part of me, yes, but it wasn't everything. It didn't have to be. I started to reclaim my life in small but meaningful ways. I took time to enjoy things I had forgotten about, like the smell of rain on the pavement or the sound of birds singing in the morning. I began to rebuild my career, to focus on my own growth. I took classes, learned new skills, and pushed myself in ways I never had before. The woman I was becoming was independent, strong, and full of potential. It felt good. It felt like freedom. I wasn't waiting for anyone else to make me feel whole. I had learned that I could make myself whole. I was more than enough on my own. The guilt, the shame, the sadness. It didn't go away, but it became something I could carry with grace. It no longer had a grip on me. I was finding peace, and that was more than I had thought possible. But then something unexpected happened. I found out I was pregnant again. It was a shock, a surprise I never saw coming. At first, I was terrified. I didn't know if I was ready to be a mother again, if I could handle the responsibility or the potential heartbreak. The fear was overwhelming, but at the same time, there was a flicker of excitement, a chance for new life, a chance to create something beautiful from all the pain. I wasn't sure how it would go or what would happen, but I knew this time would be different. I had learned so much about myself, about my strength, about my ability to move on. I wasn't the same woman who had lost everything. I was a woman who had rebuilt, who had survived, and who was ready to embrace whatever came next. This child would be part of my healing journey, part of the new life I was creating for myself. And for once, I wasn't scared. I was ready. The news of the pregnancy took me by surprise, but it also brought a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. I was scared, yes, but I was also filled with an unexpected excitement. A new chapter, a new life. I had learned to let go of the past, to live in the present, and now this little being was reminding me that life could still surprise me in the most beautiful ways. I hadn't thought I was ready to be a mother again, after everything I had gone through, but as the days went on, the fears started to fade. I was determined to be strong, to be the mother this child deserved. I was no longer defined by the tragedy that had stolen my happiness. I had rebuilt myself, and now I was ready to build something new, something full of love and hope. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had already faced the hardest parts of my life. This was just another step in my journey. The pregnancy wasn't easy. I was constantly reminded of my past, of the child I had lost, of the love I had once known, of the heartache I thought would never heal. But it also brought new strength. I had a new purpose now, and that purpose was this child. I spent the days preparing, not just for the baby, but for the future. I made plans, set goals, and started to rebuild the life I had always dreamed of. This child, no matter how unexpected, would be the greatest gift I could ever receive. I knew I had so much love to give, and this time, I wouldn't take anything for granted. I would cherish every moment, every step, and every milestone. My heart wasn't as broken as it once was. It was healing, slowly but surely. And with each passing day, I could feel myself becoming the mother I always wanted to be. As my belly grew, so did the joy in my heart. There were moments when I'd sit quietly, resting my hand on my growing bump, and feel the warmth of the life inside me. It was a comfort, a reminder that life had a way of moving forward, even after the darkest of times. I thought about my child, the one I had lost, and I wondered how different things would have been if I had kept him. But then I stopped myself. I couldn't live in the past. I couldn't change it. I could only move forward. This child was my future, my hope, my healing. The past had shaped me, yes, but it would not define me. I would create a future filled with love, not sorrow. And when this baby came into the world, I would be ready, not just as a mother, but as a woman who had fought through every hardship, every loss, to become the person I was meant to be. The closer I got to my due date, the more anxious I became. What if I wasn't ready? What if I failed? What if the pain from the past haunted me forever? The doubts crept in, but I pushed them away. I had already come so far, and I couldn't let fear control me now. I reminded myself that I was strong, that I had survived the worst, and that I was capable of overcoming anything. This was my time, my chance to create a future that was full of love, full of joy, and full of possibilities. I could do this. I would do this. And with each passing day, I grew more and more excited to meet my child, to hold them in my arms and tell them how much they were loved. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that nothing worth having ever was. The challenges would come, but I was ready for them. The day I went into labor was one of the scariest days of my life, but also one of the most beautiful. The pain was intense, but it wasn't like the pain of losing everything. This pain had purpose. This pain was bringing new life into the world. As I lay in that hospital bed, breathing through each contraction, I thought about how far I had come. I thought about the woman I was now, the woman who had faced heartbreak and loss and had survived it all. I thought about my child, the little one who would soon be in my arms, and I knew that I was ready. I wasn't the same woman I had been before. I was stronger, braver, and full of love. This baby was my future, and I would do everything in my power to make sure they knew they were loved, cherished, and wanted. When my baby was finally born, I held them in my arms, and for the first time in years, I felt complete. They were so tiny, so fragile, and yet they had the power to heal me in ways I couldn't have imagined. All the pain, all the heartbreak, all the loss, they were still a part of me, but they didn't define me anymore. My baby was a new chapter, a fresh start, a symbol of hope. I promised myself I would give them the love and the life I had always dreamed of for my first child. I would be the mother they deserved. And in that moment, as I looked into their tiny face, I knew that everything I had gone through had led me to this point. The pain had been a part of my journey, but it was no longer my story. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it fully. The days after the baby's birth were a blur of emotions. Exhaustion, joy, and a sense of wonder that I hadn't felt in years. There were sleepless nights, of course, and moments of overwhelming fear. Would I be a good mother? Would I be able to protect them from the world's harshness? But as I held my baby close, I knew I was doing the best I could. This little life was mine to care for, to nurture, to love, and I was determined to give them everything I had. The world felt different now. It felt like a place filled with possibilities, not just pain. I had a purpose again. I had a reason to keep going. And in that reason, I found strength. The days were still long, and the nights still hard, but with every smile, every coo, every tiny step forward, I could feel my heart healing more. This child was my new beginning, and together, we would face the world. As the months passed, I found myself growing more and more attached to my baby. I never imagined how deeply I would love them, how fierce and protective that love would be. They had brought me back to life in a way I didn't think was possible. Each laugh, each milestone, each little moment was a reminder that life could be beautiful again. I had been so broken, so lost, but now I had someone to live for. I knew there would be challenges ahead. There always are, but I was no longer afraid of them. I had faced the darkest parts of my life and survived. This child was my strength, and I was theirs. We would face everything together. I had a second chance at happiness, and I wasn't going to waste it. The first time I looked at my baby and realized how much they resembled the person I used to be, it hit me like a wave. I had never truly allowed myself to feel the depth of that loss until then. My child's eyes, their smile, it was all a reminder of the life I had once known, the family I had once had. It was bittersweet, but instead of drowning in sorrow, I took it as a reminder of the love I had given and the love I was capable of giving again. My past wasn't something to be feared or avoided. It was a part of me, and it had led me here, to this moment, with this beautiful child in my arms. I had the chance to create a new story, one filled with love, hope, and healing. And this time, I wouldn't let the past hold me back. Life began to settle into a new rhythm. It was a balance between taking care of my baby and rediscovering myself. I started working again, slowly, part-time at first. It felt good to have a sense of independence, to remember the woman I was before motherhood. But it wasn't easy. The balance between being a mother and keeping my own identity intact was delicate. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, when I wondered if I was doing enough, if I was enough. But then I would look at my baby, see their smile, hear their laughter, and I knew I was. I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to love them with everything I had, and I did. And that was enough. I had to learn to forgive myself. The guilt, the pain, the regrets, they were heavy burdens to carry. But I realized that if I didn't let go of them, they would destroy me. I had already been through too much to let my past steal any more of my future. I forgave myself for not being perfect. I forgave myself for the choices I had made, the mistakes I had lived with. And most importantly, I forgave myself for the guilt I had carried about my child's death, even though it wasn't my fault. I had done the best I could, and that was enough. The process wasn't easy, and there were still days when the guilt crept back in. But each time, I reminded myself that I was worthy of peace. I was worthy of love, and I was worthy of moving forward. It wasn't long before I started thinking about the future again. For so long, I had been consumed by the past, by the pain, by the heartbreak. But now, I was looking ahead. My baby was growing, and with every milestone, I felt a sense of pride and joy. They were my reason to keep going, my reason to believe in tomorrow. I started dreaming again. I thought about what I wanted for myself, what I wanted for my child. I wanted to be more than just a survivor. I wanted to thrive. I wanted to live a life that was full of joy, full of love, full of possibilities. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be obstacles, but I was ready. I had survived the worst. Now it was time to build something beautiful. Then, one day, I ran into someone from my past. It was unexpected, and it shook me. I hadn't seen him in years. The man who had left me for someone else, the one who had broken my heart and shattered my world. He was standing there, looking at me, his eyes filled with regret. I could feel my heart race, my palms sweat. But as I stood there, looking at him, I realized something. I had moved on. I had built a life for myself, a life that was mine and mine alone. I didn't need him anymore. The pain he caused was still there, but it didn't control me. I had a family, I had love, and I had peace. He was a part of my past, but he no longer had any power over my future. And in that moment, I realized I was free, completely free. As the years passed, life became easier. The pain that had once consumed me was now a distant memory, something I could look back on but no longer feel. My child had grown into a beautiful, strong person, and I had learned how to be the mother they deserved. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. It was filled with love, laughter, and peace. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up, and I had done it for me. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I questioned myself, but they were fleeting. I had become a woman who knew her worth, who knew she was enough. And I would never let anyone or anything take that away from me. Looking back now, I can see how far I've come. I never thought I would survive the heartbreak, the pain, the loss. But I did. And in doing so, I became a woman who knew her strength, who knew that no matter what happened, she would be okay. Life had tested me in ways I never expected, but it had also taught me the most important lessons of all, that love is worth fighting for, that healing is possible, and that I am enough. I've created a life for myself and my child, one filled with love, hope, and joy. And I know that no matter what happens next, I will face it with the same courage, the same resilience that I've always had. And now, as I sit here, telling you my story, I realize something. The journey isn't over. Life will continue to challenge me, to push me, to change me. But I am no longer afraid. I am no longer defined by my past. I am defined by my strength, by my love, and by the future I am building. I've come a long way from the broken woman I once was, and I know that I am capable of so much more. My story is still being written, and I am the one holding the pen. And I will make sure it is a story worth telling.